www.cs.ca/live. A friendly reminder to all participants to please use their microphones at all times for the benefit of those participating in council chambers and joining remotely. To those making submissions as part of the public meeting, please ensure you sign in using the sheet available at the accessible lectern to your left to preserve rights available to you under the Planning Act or other applicable legislation. So I'll call the meeting to order. All right, can you do a roll call, please? Sorry? You okay? We'd like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is situated with the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas. More specifically, the Mississaugas of Scugog Island, First Nation, signatories of the Gunchuk Treaty of 1788 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. This land is and will continue to be home to the Indigenous peoples. Let us acknowledge the mistakes and traumas of the past through authenticity and support through and reconciliation. Let us engage and celebrate Indigenous communities by being leaders of action in acknowledging the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations towards truth and reconciliation. Let us keep these principles close as we continue towards truth and reconciliation and as we move forward with kindness and respect as a community. Thank you. So is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? None? Okay, thank you. And do I have a motion to adopt the minutes from the previous meeting, January 6th? Councillor Bauer, Regional Councillor Marilyn Crawford. So we'll go to the next.
To you, Madam Chair, we just need to call the vote for that one.
Sorry, call a vote on that. Thank you. One isn't doing. Thank you. So moving on to the public, we have a public meeting this afternoon with respect to development charge background study and the bylaw. I don't see anybody. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak to this? It is a public meeting. Seeing none. We do have a presentation we do have a presentation from Watson and Associates, and it's Nancy Neal. Can you please have that first?
To you, Madam Chair, just to clarify as well, we'll open it up for public comment following the presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
My mistake, thank you.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, Nancy. Madam Chair, I'd just like to introduce Nancy Neal as our consultant from Watson and Associates, who has undertaken the development charge background study on behalf of the town. This has been a long process, and it's part of a legislative requirement to have a statutory public meeting. So Nancy will present the information, and then we can open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of council, staff, and the public. I'm pleased to be before you this afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to do this virtually because I did get sick over the weekend. If I do have to pause to cough, please forgive me for taking a moment through the presentation. I am going to share my screen. I'm not seeing where I do that for the presentation.
There should be a small left rectangle on the left side of your screen that says share screen.
And if I have a separate screen, how do I choose which screen to choose then?
When you select the share screen, does it give you options to choose a screen?
No, it's not. It goes green, but I'm not seeing anything
Okay.
being shared or an option to share different
I
screens.
think we've got you now.
Okay. It's, oh, I think I've got it. Are you able to see the presentation now?
No, sorry.
Okay, let me try again. Any luck there?
It looks like they're still looking for the source on our side.
How about that?
Yes. Perfect.
Great. Thank you. So as Diane was mentioning, today is a public meeting required under the Development Charges Act. Prior to council's consideration of a new DC bylaw, a background study must be prepared and be made available to the public at least 2 weeks prior to today's public meeting and at least 60 days prior to when they will consider passage of the new bylaw. The background study was made available December 17th, so we have met all of the deadlines required by the Act. The public meeting is to provide a review of what was included in the background study, what is proposed in the new bylaw, and to receive public input on the proposed policies and charges that have been put forth. I am getting feedback. Is that something you guys are getting on your end?
It sounds good on our end. Thank you.
I can hear myself. So as an overview to the timelines that have been taking place to this point, we started having detailed discussions with staff mid to late 2024. To determine whether or not the town was ready to go forward with a development charge background study at that time. They didn't, but it got restarted again last year. On December 6th, we did have a meeting with the developing landowners and stakeholders that were interested in the draft findings. We then released the final report on December 17th. Have we lost the screen? I'm starting to see myself, not the presentation.
Yeah, I think we lost the source again.
Okay, let me try again.
We're going to share the slides from our end. If you can give us a heads up to advance to the next slide when you're ready.
That would be perfect. That's great. Thank you. As noted, we released the background study on December 17th. We are here today for the public meeting, and we will be back on February 18th for council's consideration of the bylaw with an anticipated effective date of March 1st. Now, we did, after the bylaw or the background study was issued, receive one written submission from the development community asking a number of different questions. We have provided responses to them. We sent that out to staff on Friday. And if they haven't already today or on Friday got that, they will be getting that early this week, as well as council. There may be refinements to the background study that need to happen based on the findings and the discussions and questions from the development community. And if that is the case, then we will be going forward before February 18th to provide an addendum report to make any refinements required. Next slide. So the purpose of development charges is to recover capital costs associated with new infrastructure that needs to be put in place to support both residential and non-residential development that is anticipated to take place within a municipality. Municipalities are empowered to use development charges through the Development Charges Act to recover capital costs to the extent that the Act allows for. And the capital costs that we include in the development charge calculations are those that are in addition to what we call local services, or those that would be required specifically just for a development. So if you think of a subdivision agreement, for example, internal roads, water mains, sidewalks, street lights, that sort of work is the requirement of the developer to do as part of their development. What goes into the development charges are projects that have a broader benefit to multiple developments throughout the town. Next slide. So we have looked at a 10-year growth forecast where the town is anticipating an additional 23,200 people, or just over that, in new residential units. And those units are made up of different types, low density being your single and semi-detached homes, medium density being things like townhouses or row homes, high density being your apartments and additional residential units, so things such as a basement apartment, and then institutional residential units, which are things such as units within a retirement home or long-term care facility. So in total, the town is expecting just over 11,000 over the next 10 years to house those 23,236 people. On the non-residential side, we look at three different sectors: industrial, commercial, and institutional, with just under 5,900 additional employees anticipated to be added to the town. And they will be housed in buildings that are estimated to create just over 3.72 million square feet of new building spaces. Next slide. The Development Charges Act allows for a number of services to be recovered where you have growth-related costs and where you provide the services. So the services that we have embraced in the town's DC include services related to a highway, which includes all your roads and related infrastructure, including active transportation networks, public works facilities, and the fleet required to support that network. Fire protection services, parks and recreation services, library services, bylaw enforcement, which actually falls under the Provincial Offences Act service in the DC Act, and then any studies related to all of these services, as well as the development charge study itself, is all captured in a class of services called growth-related studies. Next slide. So in total, with all of the costs that are detailed in the background study in Chapter 5, there has been almost $500 million of gross capital costs identified. Now, some of those studies and costs related to infrastructure, and some of those projects will also benefit more than 10 years worth of growth that's anticipated. So for those projects that will benefit more than 10 years of growth, we've made an $11.7 million deduction for post-period benefit. Those are still growth-related costs that will get picked up in future development charge studies, but the town will have to cash flow those as the projects move forward in the next 10 years. There's also some minor deductions on the studies for DC services that we've had to deduct of just over $125,000. In addition to all of that, if a project is being replaced and upgraded or replaced and expanded, that replacement component is already in place today for your community and is therefore asset replacement. And so we deduct that as the portion of the project that benefits the existing community. That has been just over $141.27 million. In addition to that, there are grants, subsidies, and other contributions that are anticipated to be helping fund some of the projects. And so a deduction of just over 11.5 million has been deducted there. Therefore, 68% or just over $335 million has actually been captured in the calculated development charge rates. Next slide. What that generates is a cost for residential development on a per capita basis, and we then multiply that by average persons per unit in different types of units, with single and semi-detached units obviously having more average people per unit in them than some of the other types of units that are tend to be smaller. So the generated rates that are calculated for a single and semi-detached home is just just under $44,000. Multiples such as your townhomes would be $35,883. And then apartments we've differentiated based on the number of bedrooms in each unit, with units that have 2 bedrooms or more being at a rate of $23,934. And apartments that have 1 bedroom or bachelor have a rate of $15,022. We also have the special care special dwelling unit rate of $12,762, which is really meant for those institutional units such as long-term care homes, retirement homes, nursing homes, etc. So they would be paying a lower rate than the small apartments. And then on the non-residential side of things, we have a charge of $11.40 per square foot of gross floor area. Next slide. So how that compares to the current rates that you have in place right now on a single family home or semi-detached home, there would be an increase of $3,744 or about 9.3%. On the on the residential multiple side, because the average persons per unit are higher than what they have been in the past, that charge is increasing by approximately 12.9% or $4,102 per unit. We do see a shift in how your growth is taking place going forward. As municipalities run out of greenfield land and start to intensify more, we do see that the average persons per unit in smaller units do tend to become larger than what historically we've seen. And this is part of why we're seeing a bit of a larger increase on smaller units this time around than what we've seen in the past. Next slide. For the apartment type units, again, similarly, we're seeing a higher amount of persons per unit in those types of units, and that is anticipated to continue going forward. So we are looking at, for the larger type units with 2 or more bedrooms, an increase of about 23.6% or $4,571 per unit. And the smaller units with a 23.5% increase with a $2,854 per unit rate increase. Next slide. Again, with the special care dwelling units, right now what we've done, because it is a new charge that we are introducing this time around, we've compared it to the small apartment rate that has less than 2 bedrooms. So if they were going forward now, they would be charged a 2-bedroom rate. So having that lower charge means that the increase for those types of units would only be $594 per unit, or a 4.9% increase over what they would pay at a 1-bedroom rate now. On the non-residential side of things, just under 15% increase, or $1.48 per square foot over and above what your current rates are. I do want to note that you will see throughout these charts a pretty significant decrease in the services related to a highway component. And really that is related to the fact that there has been quite a few projects completed in the past and paid for that have been removed. And then there's also a change in the traditional expansion of roadways to adding more active transportation and other modes of transit that can happen in areas where intensification is happening and there's no room left to expand to add more vehicle lanes. So the town is hoping that through a change with more active transportation measures in place, that will help to get people out of their vehicles and using those other alternative methods of moving around throughout the town. Of course, the active transportation corridors are much cheaper than expanding roads. On the Parks and Recreation side, that is where you'll see a significant increase. And that is really related to new projects that have been identified that are needed to support the intensification growth. Next slide. What we've done here is try to give you a comparison of where the town of Ajax compares to other municipalities within Durham region and as well as some throughout the Greater Toronto area that are of comparable size and experiencing the same type of growth. So really from where you are on the green line there and moving up to the increased calculated rate for the single and semi-detached homes, you're still really around the same area that you currently are compared to all of the comparators on the list. Now, I do want to note that about a half an hour ago, we received a notice from the region that they, through an Ontario Land Tribunal hearing and decision, their upper tier charges will be reduced. So that single family rate, for example, on the regional side of things will actually be reduced by over $11,100. And that'll be put in place immediately. So although we're showing right now the $86,095 for their component, that's actually reducing to just over $74,900 going forward. So unfortunately, we didn't have the time to revise these surveys prior to today's meeting, considering we just found out that information. But that will be applicable to all of the Durham region municipalities. And so we don't anticipate that where the town shows on these surveys will be significantly different. Next slide. Similarly, on the multiple units, we've shown you where your current rates are and where that calculated rate is, moving you up slightly over and above Mississauga, but really in the still in the same range with all DC charges from the lower tier, upper tier, and school boards involved. Again, this charge will also be going down for the regional rates. Next slide. Again, with the apartments that have 2 or more bedrooms, there is a little bit more of a significant charge or increase from where your current rates are, based on what we're seeing in those average persons per unit being housed in those type of units. And next slide should be the 1-bedroom apartment bachelor, again, moving up from where you currently are to around the middle of the pack, still a little lower for your comparators. For the non-residential, next slide, we've actually shown 2 different comparisons. Although you have a blended rate for all industrial, commercial, and institutional developments, some municipalities actually differentiate their rates for commercial, industrial, institutional. Some differentiate by retail or non-retail. So we have shown you the commercial, and on the next slide, the industrial comparisons. Really, town of Ajax is still fairly low, even with the change anticipated with this calculated rate compared to the others on your comparator list. And those regional charges will also be going down, which will keep you low on the list as well. Next slide. Similarly, on the industrial, there are some municipalities such as Oshawa that fully exempt industrial. That's a policy that council put in place. They are the only one that fully exempt industrial of your comparators. So compared to where you are currently, again, a slight increase over and above where you are now compared to all of the others. Next slide. What has taken place over the last 5 years is significant changes to the development charge legislation. There have been much more policy put in place for mandatory or statutory exemptions, discounts, rules on when you calculate and collect the development charges that really has limited municipalities in recovering all of the growth-related costs that they need to put the infrastructure in place that we've identified. Calculated rates, you won't be able to recover all of that. That is because of these statutory exemptions. The industrial building expansion for a one-time expansion up to 50% of the size of your building without having to pay a DC, that has been in place for many years. It's not new, but it continues. Residential intensification, where you can expand your home, has also been there for many years. And of course, municipalities, regions, counties, school boards don't charge each other for their own DCs. And that's been there forever. Additional residential units is now new. So there is a mandatory exemption now where to an existing home or a new home, you can add up to 2 additional units. It can be, one of those units can be an ancillary. So it can be in your backyard as a garden suite or granny flat. And they are mandatorily exempt, where before you used to be able to collect an apartment unit rate on that, you won't be able to going forward. Affordable and attainable units are also mandatorily exempt, as well as affordable units that may be set out in an inclusionary zoning bylaw if you have one. Now, the affordable units that are exempt are based on a threshold for those that are owned and those that are rented. And those thresholds are set out in a bulletin that the province released last spring and will be updating, from our understanding, on an annual basis. So staff will have to understand the rent that is going to be offered for units that are being purpose-built rentals, or the purchase price for those units that are going to be sold. to be able to then measure against whether or not a unit will be affordable, and in which case they would be exempt from the development charges. Attainable units, although they are also exempt, we're still waiting for some regulation around to define what attainable means. Right now, the only definition in the Development Charges Act is that it is not a rental unit and it's not an affordable unit. But we don't know what else that means then. But that can come into place at any point through regulation. And once that happens, the town would have to mandatorily exempt those types of units as well. Nonprofit housing is now fully exempt as well. Universities or any campus, large or small, that receives ongoing funding from the province is mandatorily exempt. And then one of the new things for rental housing is that there is a discount from the rate depending on the number of bedrooms in each unit. So with 3 bedrooms or more in a unit, you get a 25% discount. 2-bedroom units would get a 20% discount. And anything that has a 1-bedroom or a bachelor unit would get a 15% discount off the rate. In addition to all of those exemptions and discounts, there's been installment payments put in for rental residential developments and any type of institutional development, where they no longer pay their development charge at the time of building permit issuance. They actually pay in 6 equal installments, with the first installment being due at the time of occupancy permit, and then every year for the next 5 years on the anniversary of that occupancy. And then for any developments that are proceeding through a rezoning application or a site plan application, their rate is going to be frozen at the day of their application. And then depending on when their approval of that application is received, they will get a period of time to pull their building permit, and they will still pay the rate that's in effect on the date that they applied for their rate. If the approval of the application took place prior to June 6th of 2024, they have 2 years from the date of the approval of their application to get their building permit issued. And they will pay at the rate that was in effect at the time of the application. For any applications that did not receive approval prior to June 6, 2024, that 2-year window gets shrunk to 18 months. So all of that is statutory and in place. The draft bylaw that's been put forward in an appendix to the background study includes all sorts of new definitions and rules around all of that to ensure it matches what the Act says. In addition to all of that, every municipality has the ability to include additional what we consider discretionary or non-statutory exemptions, discounts, rules, phase-ins, etc. So right now, there is an exemption for temporary buildings that do not have a foundation, as long as they are not in place for more than 8 consecutive months or 8 months within 1 calendar year. Non-residential parking structures, including any portion related to an integrated excluding any portion related to an integrated parking office or kiosk or holding inventory for a non-residential use, shall be partially exempt from all the components of the DC except for fire protection services and the services related to a highway components of the charge. And then properties with agreements that were entered into before March 1st, 2025 within the downtown community improvement area and Pickering Village community improvement area will continue to be exempt. So I do want to note that it is council's decision, and if they wish to further reduce the DC rates in whole or part for any type or class of development, or phase in the new rates, any foregone revenue similar to the current statutory and the proposed non-statutory exemptions and discounts that are already noted would further reduce what you can recover through development charge revenues. Those then have to be made up from other sources, which typically falls to your property taxes unless you are able to get outside funding. So alternatively, council could look at the capital list and decide that they don't want to move forward with certain projects, which really means that you may be cutting the service levels that you've provided your current community, as you will have to make do with those service levels that are in place as you grow. So every municipality has the ability to make those decisions. Next slide. So for next steps, we are here today to receive public comment. If there's a need to refine the proposed bylaw, we will do that, as well if there is something that is brought up that through staff discussions is identified that there is a need to refine the calculated rates, then we would issue an addendum report and revise the draft bylaw prior to it coming forward on the 18th of this month for council's passage. As noted, February 18th is the day that we are assuming council will consider passing the new bylaw with an anticipated effective date of March 1st. Once that has happened, notice of bylaw passage must be provided within 20 days as per the Development Charges Act. There is a 40-day appeal period where anyone can appeal any part of the projects that are included or the calculations within the background study. And then if there is no appeal, within 60 days of the enforcement date of March 1st, a new DC pamphlet has to be made available that highlights the policies within the bylaw and those calculated rates. Next. So that is my presentation today. I'd be happy to answer any questions from the public or council.
Thank you, Ms. Neal, for your presentation. As I see no members of the public in the gallery, are there any online, Mr. Clerk? So we have one online from Ledham Limited, Development Limited. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. I'll try to get into the camera. Okay. Hello, everybody. So thank you for the presentation. The questions that we have is, it looks like that the presentation doesn't have some of the most updated information because as was noted, Durham region decided to reduce part of their portion of the development charges. In addition to, a couple of days ago, Mississauga decided to drastically cut their development charges, specifically in relation to purposely built rentals. There is also a decision a few weeks ago from City of Vaughan to reduce their development charges. I didn't see any of those reflected in the presentation. Generally speaking, the way development charges are calculated, it has to pay for the growth. Growth has to pay for the growth, which is fair concept. But on the same time, growth does not have to pay for the service which required by existing residents. The way we see it, many of the allocation in this report were kind of tilted toward new development, and it's not totally fair. For example, huge amounts from road improvements allocated to new developments. In all fairness, there is some projects that have been spoke about for years, and they really has to do with existing condition by clients, going to be benefiting not only future residents, but going to be benefiting obviously existing residents, and yet majority of this expense being attributed to development charges increase, which is going to be penalizing all the future residents. On the same time, some of the funds that our town received from different levels of government, from federal government and provincial government, did not completely reflected in the study, and it has to be a very simple mathematical solution when you take all the grants that been received specifically for development purposes and you deduct it from the total requirements, and yet it's not reflected in the study. The way we see what's happening, generally speaking, all the GTA municipalities, there is more and more understanding that development charges represent huge chunk of expenses, and this stands in the way of affordability, specifically for the rental housing, and that's why all the municipalities understand it, and many of them reduce it in some way. So we believe it has to be somehow calculated in this report, and numbers has to be adjusted, because as it stands right now, the difference in price for apartment buildings, it's about 23%. It's quite a drastic jump in development charges. That's our presentation.
Is there any response to that from staff, or? Okay. Is that your only comment? Any other questions?
No, that's our only comment.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Sorry, I know. So we'll now go to council members who have questions. Councilor Rob Tyler Morant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is to the presenter, Ms. Neal. Thank you for your presentation, your details. Is she there? Am I speaking to Ms. Neal? Yeah. So in your recommendations and in your findings, did you ever consider, and has it ever been considered, if we look at page 9, I think in your presentation, I don't know if it's page 9 or page 7, there's two numbers there, but the one that has the DC calculations, and you see the one, and then it has actual numbers, right, like $43,991. And I'm thinking, just very, very simple math, it's probably about 5% of what the unit might be worth, right? Like the unit might be worth about $900,000. I don't know, like, let's just say. So did you ever think of percentages? So if you say the cost of putting that up is probably half that, right? Maybe it costs $400,000 to put up that house. And you say whatever instead of a dollar amount, you just say it's 4% on a single and semi-detached dwelling. It's, 3.5% on other, apartments, bedroom. So that way, we might not be having this meeting if there was just a set. That's my first part of my question. And then it kind of ties into my second part. Has there ever been discussions of standardization where if you built a single, you're smiling, but I'm wondering, like single semi-detached dwelling in Vaughan or in Burlington or in Ajax, it is a 4% DC charge. And that way everybody would kind of, be locked in and there'd be less discussion perhaps. What are your thoughts on that?
Right now, we have to follow the methodology that's set out in the Development Charges Act. One thing that we cannot predict or control is the sale price of homes. And that will differ depending, even within a municipality. If you're closer to the water, sometimes that's more expensive if you have waterfront frontage versus if you are closer to a highway, for example, or, a rail line, for example, versus other areas of a municipality, downtown cores, etc. So even within a municipality, the same house being built in two different places could be vastly different when it comes to the sale price. And that can, again, throughout the Greater Toronto Area, even Durham region, can be quite different. We can't control the sale price of what is a unit is being sold for. What we have empirical data on is from census is those average number of people that live in various size units. And so we do have to follow the methodology set out in the Development Charges Act. And then depending on what each municipality's needs are to expand infrastructure to service the growth, and understand that every municipality has a different standard of what they want to provide their community. That makes a difference in the charges. If you talk about those standards, you may want to provide one arena for every 30,000 people. Another municipality might be happy providing one unit for every 60,000 people. Well, in your municipality, then, if you were to grow by 30,000 people, you'd need another half of one. And so we're not ready to build another arena. So because you can set your own standards of the types of services and the level of which you will provide those services to your community, and every other municipality does the same, no two DCs are exactly alike. So it's difficult to say, well, if we just said 4 or 5% of the house price, that's going to differ even within your own municipality. Does that help?
Thank you. Regional Councillor Crawford?
There was comment, I think in the last speaker was talking about the reduction of Vaughan, the city of Vaughan and Mississauga. And yet, when you look at your chart, they are still the top DC. They have in just about every single category. They're in the top 5 of DC charges. Vaughan just recently reduced theirs, I believe, is it to 2018 rates? Is that what they did? That was my question, but I will say that even with, so go ahead.
Yeah. So, yeah, let me just kind of highlight what Vaughan has done, because they have offered a DC deferral as well as a DC reduction program, depending on certain criteria being met. So not all developments will get that reduction.
Okay.
It doesn't apply to their area specific charges. So in addition to the municipal wide charges, they have area specific at current rates. As well, they have to provide securities for the development charges if there's a deferral agreement. In addition, there's timelines to be met to actually get the building permits pulled. And if the building permits are not pulled in a specific time, it reverts back to the current rates.
Is that 3 years? Because many of the municipalities that I've heard of are doing, you have 3 years after you submit the site plan, and if you don't do something, then that gets pulled and you start all over again.
I'd have to go and look at the specific timelines. I don't have that off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But there's also no retroactivity. So they collect their hard services, so their water, their wastewater, their roads components at the time of subdivision agreement. And if you've already entered in and paid those components, they do not get a discount. It's only the balance of the services they collect at building permit issuance that are subject to a potential reduction. They do have an application process for this. So it's not just everyone gets it.
So it's not apples to apples.
It's not. And then if I was to go forward, for example, and I said, I've got 100 units that are single family homes. And at the end of the day, I build 101 or 99. The units are broken, and you go back to paying the full amount on whatever units you have. So there's a lot of rules around what Vaughan has put in place. So it's not quite as easy as just saying every unit gets a discount at the moment.
Excellent.
Okay.
Good. Thank you.
This is why for Vaughan, we showed the full calculated rate. Now, Mississauga has put in a reduction again, 50% for where the building permits that are allowed for footings and foundations will be issued prior to November 13th, 26. So it's not on everything. If they don't get permits by then, they go back to paying their current rates. There's also 100% reduction on DCs for 3-bedroom units in purpose-built rental. Again, where the permits are issued before November 13th, 2026. They also have deferrals being offered for some DCs where it's all going to be collected at occupancy instead of building permit issuance. Okay, and then there's also other deferrals that they're offering. Now, the Development Charges Act and your bylaw has always allowed you to enter into a deferral agreement if that is something you want to consider as part of your DC bylaw or DC implementation. You don't have to have that written in the bylaw.
Okay.
So if there's certain types of developments that the town wants to incentivize by giving them a little bit longer to pay the DCs, you already have the ability to do that as well. They are as well in Mississauga specifically requesting that the Canada Housing and Construction Fund, the Housing Accelerator Fund, and the Building Faster Fund, any money received from that goes directly to making up the lost revenue that they'll get, that they will not be able to achieve through the DC revenues because of any discounts, exemptions, or deferrals.
Okay.
So they are specifically, which the Mr. Tarski actually noted that some grant funding may not have been deducted, but that's because it may already be allocated to specific projects that aren't in the DC or to making up for some of these exemptions for affordable housing and other things, discounts on rental housing that you're now going to have to pay for. And if some of the grant funding doesn't help pay for that, it will fall to the taxpayers.
Thank you.
And that's what Mississauga has been very specific of saying, we're using that other money then to pay for these discounts.
Okay.
And
I know
reduce
the mayor of Markham spoke out very strongly against what the city of Vaughan was doing and suggested that if he had, in his municipality, reduced to 2018 rates, it would mean a 52% loss, which would mean a 52% increase in taxes over the next, I think it was 5 years he estimated. So thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Bauer, you had a question?
Thank you, Chair Dies. Thank you, Ms. Neal, for the presentation. Very interesting information, and a lot of work went into this, for sure. So I just had a couple of questions. You mentioned that the region's charges will be reduced for the various units, and I think you said it was $74,900 something for the single and semis. Do you happen to have what those new lowered amounts are for each type of unit that you could tell us, please?
For the semi-detached, as mentioned, that's dropping down to $74,941. The multiple rates are dropping down to $59,737. The 2-bedroom and more, or 2-bedroom plus unit apartments are dropping to $43,612. The 1-bedroom bachelor to $26,778. The commercial rate to $40.48 per square foot, industrial to $19.24 per square foot, and institutional to $22.26 per square foot. $22.26.
Thank you very much for that. And then the other question, I know that on slide 7, and maybe this is off topic really, but where it listed the townwide services the calculations are based on, and I do notice that hospital services are not included in that, and I'm guessing that's a provincial calculation, or could you talk about that, please?
Yeah, through the chair, the hospital services is not considered an eligible DC service because it's the development charge does not allow you to recover any component that they may ask you to contribute to. So
And
it's ineligible.
I'm so sorry. You said they were not considered eligible, and then you got cut off a little bit, so I didn't hear the rest of it.
Sorry, because
Oops.
municipalities are often asked to contribute to the expansion or new hospitals going in place. Because it is an ineligible service under the Development Charges Act, you cannot recover for any component of it.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. That was my question.
Are any further questions? No? There's no more online, then I take it we're good? Okay. So we have a recommendation for the presentation that council received for information, the December 17th Town of Ajax 2024 Development Charges Background Study prepared by Watson and Associates. And 2, that all written submissions received no later than 12 p.m. noon on February the 6th, 2025, be referred to staff and Watson and Associates Economists Limited for consideration in preparation of the final development charge recommendations and bylaws, which will be considered by council on February the 18th, 2025. So. Sorry, I do have a question. You do? Yeah, sorry. Okay, Nancy, go ahead.
Sorry about that. I do have a question, and I don't know if this would go to the presenter or Director Valentine. So I just want to clarify with regards to DC studies. If there was a significant gap in DC collection, we're not allowed to increase taxes to pay for uncollected DC charges, correct?
Through the chair, no.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that. And in that case, there would be a debenture and a collection of DCs for all the projects as opposed to collecting from the taxpayer. So we're not displacing any tax funds to replace DC funding, correct?
Through the chair, that's
Sorry.
correct. Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question. If you cannot collect something through development charges, you do have to make the funding up from some other source. Unless you get funding from other sources, external, then typically that does fall to property taxes.
Sorry, Nancy.
So
Nancy Neal, sorry, I'm going to jump in here. I think what Councillor Henry is asking is if we are building a DC project and there's not sufficient DC funds in the reserve to pay for that project, you're asking whether the tax base would then pay for it. And I don't believe so, because we could take out debenture, which would then be funded from the DCs.
Correct, that is my question, correct. Thank you.
Any further questions? You, Regional Councillor Crawford, you sure?
Sir, I just wanted to add, Councillor Henry and Councillor Moran and I went to the Housing Summit on Thursday, and it was suggested that we don't know what we're doing with DC charges, nor do we understand them, and that any shortfall that we have from DC charges should be funded by the tax base. So you're saying that is incorrect. So perhaps we do know.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
It was suggested
Right.
at the Housing Summit that councillors do not know what DC charges are used for, and that if we had shortfalls, that we should, and if we properly understood DC charges, that we should be increasing tax dollars to pay for infrastructure upgrades. So perhaps we do know what they're used for.
Through the chair, I would suggest you do know what they're used for, yes.
Thank you. And it's pretty specific in the legislation what DC charges what projects we can use for DC charges, correct?
Through the chair, all of the infrastructure growth-related projects are identified in each background study, which is what is used to help calculate the actual charge that we're collecting.
It was also suggested that we have a ridiculous amount of reserves in our for DC charges reserve, And we typically do put our DCs in reserves simply because we're waiting for projects to be completed, i.e. if the region is widening a road, we are responsible for sidewalks. We would wait till that project was done to use those reserves to do the sidewalks, correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Your mic's on.
Thank you. Can I have a vote then on the recommendation, please?
Madam Chair, if you could get a mover and seconder before we open the vote?
Councillor Bauer and Councillor Tyler Moran. Thank you. That's carried. We have another presentation report on Ajax Climate Risk and Resiliency Plan Strategy, which is a 5-year update. Mr. Richardson.
There we go. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Committee. My name is Cameron Richardson. I'm the Supervisor of Environmental Sustainability and Climate Change within the Planning and Development Services Department at the Town of Ajax. And I'm here today to present to you the 5-year update on the Ajax Climate Risk and Resiliency Plan Implementation Strategy. So I presented to this committee back in September of 2024, this project specifically. I gave some context about climate change in Town of Ajax, across the region of Durham, and provincially. I provided a brief history on the Ajax Climate Risk and Resiliency Plan, actually dating back to about 2013, and also provided a history of adaptation planning within the Town of Ajax. I provided a progress report on the 5-year update, specifically phases 1 to 3 of the project. And I also introduced some priority action areas that were identified and confirmed through consultation with the community, as well as the objectives that we were looking to achieve as part of this project. As a reminder, this 5-year update was broken down into 5 distinct phases. Phase 1 to 3 were presented at that September CAP meeting, and following that meeting we went out and did some evaluation and refinement, some deep stakeholder consultation with our partners, and drafted the report that is being presented to you today and is included in the staff report as attachment 1. So based on our background research and analysis and our community consultation, we identified priority action areas that we wanted to focus on specifically for this 5-year update. Those action areas are listed there and include extreme heat, extreme wind, poor air quality, and urban flooding. To address those action areas, we also identified the following objectives. We want to limit exposure to poor air quality resulting from climate change, and this was really a main point that we heard from the community and really based off of the terrible summer we had with wildfire smoke in Town of Ajax. We want to limit the frequency of power outages that are experienced across the town, and that's typically associated with freezing rain and wind. We want to improve the resiliency of our community buildings and infrastructure. We also want to improve both the community and individual levels of preparedness and response to extreme weather events, but specifically to extreme heat. And we want to continue to mitigate and adapt to climate change impacts through restoration and urban forest initiatives. So based on those objectives, staff have identified and are recommending adopting 10 new action items as part of the updated implementation strategy, as well as amending 1 existing action item. Here's a table here that is actually provided within attachment 1 of your report. I'm not going to go through it all in detail, but this lays out the 10 new action items. All of those 10 new action items address the objectives that I listed on a previous slide, as well as help to push forward collaborative projects and shared objectives that we have with our partners, including the Region of Durham, our Conservation Authority partners, and other local area municipalities. I will draw your attention to that very final row. This is the one amended action that we are recommending for the implementation strategy, and that is to amend the existing action 8.6, which right now speaks to actually implementing the preferred solution identified within the Crothers Creek EA. However, due to the time that has passed since that EA was completed, we need to amend that action to update that EA as required to recommend flood control measures to protect properties in the Pickering Beach neighborhood. So that is the one amended action item being put forward today. And with that, it's short and sweet, but I am happy to answer any questions you have on the staff report or the attachment today.
No questions from council?
Thank you.
Good job, well done. So, I have a recommendation that the council adopt the Ajax Climate Risk and Resiliency Plan Implementation Strategy 5-year update, and council authorize staff to proceed with the implementation of the updated implementation strategy. So could I call a vote on that, please? I need a mover and a seconder, yep. Okay, same. Councilor Bauer and Councilor Crawford. Thank you. Thank you. And that completes the end of our meeting today, so I need a mover, Tyler Moran and Councilor Henry, thank you, to adjourn. Thank you, everybody.